Look, let's put this to Richard Tice, his deputy leader at Reform UK, who I'm delighted to say joins us now. A very good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Julia. And yes, he is the best communicator without question, and has had more influence on British politics in the last 20 years than anybody. You might just like to remind James Ball that Germany's in recession. I think they're still in the European Union.
Yes, yes, this is a fair point. Thing is, being in government isn't just about communication, as we've seen with the trouble that previous Tory governments and indeed the current Labour government is having. This is going to have to be about action. And the reality is that you and Nigel Farage and all the rest of your lot, you've never actually had to deliver on the promises that you've made. OK, last election wasn't a full manifesto. Nigel Farage pointed out no one reads them, no one trusts them anyway. But when you say you're going to detain and deport all illegal boat arrivals, you're going to build all these new build detention centres, and you're going to deport up to 600,000 illegal migrants. That'll include people who've arrived legally on a visa and overstayed. People perhaps have good reason to say, well, yeah, proof's going to be in the pudding. How are you actually going to do it all?
Well, the reality is, first of all, if you don't try, you've got no chance whatsoever. And what we've come up with is a detailed plan. What we've announced is just a summary. There's lots of details behind it of how you are legally entitled and able to detain and deport illegal asylum seekers, illegal migrants. And that's by leaving the ECHR, serving notice, scrapping the Human Rights Act, well intended, but has become a nightmare, and derogating from certain international treaties that are an excuse for the human rights lawyers, basically, to interfere with what I would call common sense decisions. And if we do those things, then we're in a position legally to detain and deport people without the human rights lawyers preventing it. And yes, guess what? In COVID, we built some Nightingale hospitals in a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
Maybe we could do the same. Maybe we could use the army to build those sorts of things with a different design so that they detain people. That's what you do in a can-do situation with a leadership team that has a track record. We've all succeeded in business. We know how to get things done. We know how to make things happen. We know how to negotiate proper deals with construction firms. And guess what? We'll get lots of this organised in the run-up to the next general election.
Some of the criticism has been, we haven't got the details, like exactly where are you going to put these camps? And I have to say, I think that's a fairly risible thing to say. A year out from the election, yeah, I would want to know that detail. We've also had criticism of the cost. The cost has been put at, give or take, £10 billion. We're told by your critics that's not costed. It will cost way more than that. What do you say to that?
Well, Zia Yusuf set out a list of the items. And look, if you want to nickel and dime the costs, fine. We're 4 years out. There might be a thing called inflation, who knows? The real point is whether it costs £500 million more or £1 billion less. The real point is we got the process and the legal route to be able to do it. You can't spend any of that if you're not allowed to by the human rights lawyers. And the fury and rage amongst the British people that I experience when I talk to people in my constituency. Just this week, I've had 2 meetings with residents in local pubs, and all they want to talk about is how can we stop the boats? How can we reduce legal immigration? It is the #1 issue for the majority of
and that's
people.
what polling has suggested. What do you say to people who say, look, and when things are hard and people are worried about the cost of living and there's been a lot of difficulty in recent years, people turn to scapegoating people, and all the focus is put on migrants, not just illegal migrants but also legal migrants, and that you are part of that. Some of the critics will say, you're just pretending that immigration, whether legal or illegal, is the biggest problem we face in this country. And those critics would say that's not the biggest problem. What do you say to that?
We're leading in every single national poll, and that's because people trust us to sort out immigration, both legal and illegal.
But how big, people can say it's their #1 concern. How big an issue is that in relation to
let me tell you,
the NHS or the economy or the housing issue?
Well, the last time we had a vote on the 1st of May, we won 10 councils, 2 mayoralties and a parliamentary by-election. And we are winning council by-elections every week. So people are voting all the time, and they're voting with their feet, and they're voting for reform. So it is a huge issue. And people can see with these hotels the cost of them, whilst they can't get their own GP or dental appointment, people think it's just patently unfair, and we are a nation that believes in fairness and decency. So it is a huge issue. We've got a track record of being able to deliver it, and some people have criticised us saying, oh, you're going to have to do deals with some nasty people around the world. Well, do you know what? Sometimes you do business with people you may not like. If you want peace, if you want a ceasefire in Gaza, you've got to do a deal with Hamas. If you want a ceasefire in Ukraine, you've got to do a deal with Putin. If you want to send people back to Afghanistan, well, you've got to deal with the Taliban. You may not like it, but it's not our fault we're in the situation we're in.
Well, it is interesting, actually. Nick Thomas-Simons this morning is pointing out, ahead of a speech he was giving behind the podium, saying borders, bills, jobs. On none of those three items is Labour doing very well. It was an interesting choice for them for that. But he was saying that we already have deported people to Afghanistan. Germany deports to Afghanistan. So it's a very strange criticism for Labour to say you can't do a deal with the Taliban to deport people to Afghanistan when we ourselves have deported people to Afghanistan.
Exactly, and we're paying them 150 million a year in foreign aid. And in business, you have a plan A, B, C, and D. So that if plan A doesn't work, you've got alternative routes, and that's what we will do. We talked about it yesterday, Nigel and Zia in the press conference saying we'll have alternative arrangements so that if someone's unable to reach an appropriate arrangement with, then we'll have an alternative plan, whether it's British overseas territories, whether it's Rwanda, Albania, whatever.
Have you asked the people in the Ascension Islands whether they want, 20,000 illegal migrants to turn up on their shores?
Not yet, but it is a sovereign British soil, and the reality is that if we have to do things on a short-term basis, a few years on a temporary basis, within the sort of the multi-century existence of the United Kingdom, well, it's a price worth paying to get a major emergency sorted. OK,
what about the issue of women and children? Again, the critics say, you've not tackled that issue, although Nigel Farage was clear, people, women would also be deported. What you say and what actually happens in the reality when on the BBC 6 o'clock news you've got a crying child and a crying mother being led to a plane or God forbid they are killed when they return home or the like, what do you do then? Does this policy actually survive contact with reality?
Yes, because leadership is about making tough choices and tough decisions. But do you know what the role of the British government is? It's to protect our borders, defend our sovereignty, and ensure the safety of our own British women and girls. That's the most important thing. We're not responsible for the actions of regimes elsewhere in the world, however unpleasant they may be. So, and if we don't make it clear that this applies to everybody, then you'll find all sorts of people playing all sorts of games, and then you're back to square one. We have to be clear and robust here. And if you come here illegally, don't expect to remain here. The reality is, Julia, we don't know how many people are here. Is it 800,000? Is it 1.2 million? But we're making it clear that people can return voluntarily. If not, we will find you and we will deport you.
And how will you find people? By the way, it's probably a lot more than 1.2 million, given that when we left the EU and they got people to sign up saying, oh, we're EU citizens, we've been here for years, we want to stay, and not their right to stay. But they had undercounted by 2 million. So I'm pretty sure, and those are people who would have been in the system legally able to work. I'm pretty sure we've got a lot more than that from other countries who we may want to not have here. Are you pledging ultimately, let's say Reform get elected, let's say you do 2 terms. Are you pledging ultimately to remove everyone who has arrived here illegally or has overstayed their student or work or tourist visa to remain here illegally?
Yes, if you come here illegally, you should expect to be deported. But
what about someone who came here 20 years ago? They've got children here. Maybe they've married a Brit. They're I'm never quite sure how people are legally working here if they're here illegally, but people, they've got roots in their community. What would you say about that particular case?
You're here illegally. If you're here illegally, you've either got to ensure that you can be here legally through the appropriate routes, or, I'm sorry, but you can't stay. And it was suggested to me, well, what about children of those people who are here illegally? They are not British citizens. You do not have automatic British birthright by birth. So I'm afraid they've got to go because we have to make it absolutely clear. Now, look, with 1.2 million people, plus or minus, Julia, clearly We may or may not get down to every last one. We're not, we're not completely unrealistic, but it's right to be ambitious. It's right to set that as a target. And I think the British people are supporting reform in this objective.
If you were able to deport, say, 600,000 people over a 5-year term, that's an average of 328 a day. But the reality is, and our callers have already made this point, you're going to be facing the entire establishment of Britain. Unless you had in fact, even with an overwhelming majority, you would still find it hard in the Commons to get anything done facing up to the House of Lords, even if it was a manifesto commitment, the blob in the civil service, the human rights lawyers, even the process of ending the Human Rights Act, leaving the ECHR, derogating from the Refugee Convention. They would be long processes. You're left for probably max 2, max 3 years, realistically, to actually deport those people. Are you confident of your ability to take on the blob that has been in charge of this country for the last 20, 30 years?
Yes, we are confident of our ability. And that's why we're setting these plans out in detail now, so that the blob can have their fits and their sort of rants and rages, and they will expose themselves. But ultimately, we're saying to the British people, give us a big majority, and then, yes, we can drive it through the Houses of Parliament. And the advantage of having won 10 councils is we're already getting some examples and experiences of the blob at work. It's extraordinary, it's sometimes shocking, it's sometimes funny. But it gives us an education about how to deal with these people.
Are we going to need mass removals, sackings, if necessary, of people currently in the civil service who don't understand that they are servants to the public?
Quite possibly. If they try and put blocks in the way, then yes, they're going to have to go. They're going to have to be suspended. They're going to have to be fined. What I'd rather they do is accept the will of the British people in a significant way. But we will produce all of this draft legislation using our own lawyers, our own barristers, because we're not going to rely on civil service lawyers. They take too long and they won't do the job properly. So, yeah, look, it's going to be difficult, Julia. No one's saying it's going to be easy. But what I do know is it worth trying? Absolutely. Do the British people want us to try? Most definitely.
That's the truth. Given, though, that we had a vote, very clear vote for Brexit in 2016, it took almost 5 full years to get that through the block. You're saying you're going to do a better job.
Not reform.
OK. And what do you say to people who say, look, there's concerns about Human Rights Act. You're going to replace it with a new British Bill of Rights. And again, these are the sort of things that usually take royal commissions for God knows how many years to come up with. Are you confident about scrapping human rights law legislation in this country, that will not damage British people?
I'm confident because guess what? You and I are old enough to remember the 80s and 90s. Things were going rather well. We were growing as an economy. We were getting richer. We were using oil and gas. We weren't talking about the price of electricity. And guess what? The public services worked rather better. And that was before the Human Rights Act. So, yes, life did exist rather well before the Human Rights Act. You could argue that actually the Human Rights Act and other daft legislation afterwards has been responsible for the rise in lawfare by the human rights lawyers, the collapse in productivity, and the reduction in growth and prosperity. So, yeah, I'm not worried about that at all. The British Bill of Rights would come after the scrapping of the HRA so that we can get this done and get on with it.
All right. Well, I think an awful lot of us are willing you on in terms of getting that job done. Have you got anyone in mind to run that migration deportation policy? Because I've offered my services yesterday.
Oh, I think you'd be a brilliant Empress of Immigration, Julia, if you were serious in your generous offer yesterday. But it might be a competitive application role, Julia, because there's lots of people who are quite keen on getting this done.
Absolutely. Hey, I will defer to the person who can get the job done the most. Just finally, I want to ask you, while we've been on air, Nigel Farage, your leader, has had a press conference with announcing the first Reform UK MSP, member of the Scottish Parliament. Graham Simpson, who's a Tory member of the Scottish Parliament, has defected to Reform. Do you think it's the first of many?
Well, let's wait and see, but we're delighted to welcome Graham Simpson on board. We nearly got our own Ross Lambie elected in a recent by-election at Lark Hall. So, look, this is just the beginning. And the truth is that the SNP and Labour are terrified of the progress of reform in Scotland. We've got the Holyrood elections next May, and it'll be very close indeed. And you know, what they realise up there, and they recognise, is that our slogan of Drill Scotland Drill will make people better off and more prosperous.
OK, well, yes, we discussed those policies on the show yesterday as well. Richard Tice, pleasure to talk to you, Deputy Leader of Reform UK. Thank you for that. Claire Pearsall, we've got a little bit more time to have a chat after the break, but your initial reaction to what Richard Tice had to say?
Lots of things.
As a Tory.
There's a lot of things to pick up on. I don't think you can do mass sackings of people just because they don't agree with you.
No, talking about any civil servant who acts in a politically biased way to try and stop the will of a democratically elected minister should absolutely be sacked on the spot.
OK, I think there'll be issues with that.
There will be issues with it.
All right,
the whole civil service out on strike. I'm not sure that's going to be an issue. I think the country will work very well without them.
And reform-run councils. I think the jury is still out on that one. They are new. They need to have their opportunities to see if they can actually deliver what they say they're going to do. I live now with a reform-run council, so I'm watching very, very closely at how that happens.
Very interesting. Thank you very much for talking to me more about that and all the other topics.